So you got a GX460 and you need to know how to install your Ironman 4x4 Foam Cell Pro kit, you are in the right place. We've got our 2015 GX460. We're going to show you step by step how to get that Foam Cell Pro put on it. Let's do it right now. Not an emergency, but we still need to break it. Oh, I know Jack. Get them wheels off. It's only a habit if you do it every time. Tires go off and under your truck. Sure, and get your jack stand set. We got the front of our GX jacked up, but our GX has the KDSS system on it. It's kinetic, dynamic, suspension system. Anyways, it's very technical. It's basically hydraulically controlled sway bar stabilization system, and most GX come with it. You got to make sure you get the back of your truck jacked up too, so all four corners are hanging freely. Then we can disengage the system. So I'm going to walk you through how to get that system disabled, but you can also go to the interweb, Ironman4x4America.com, and download in-depth instructions, so you don't have to listen to me. You can read it for yourself. Now you just need to learn how to read. I know your initial tendency is to take a shortcut and jack from your rear tow hitch. Don't do it. Your jack, like mine, probably isn't tall enough to get you the kind of lift you need to get those jack stands underneath your frame rails. So jack from underneath your differential. That'll give you more than enough clearance. Just like this. While you're jacking this up, you want to keep in mind, you need to jack the back of the vehicle up high enough so after you have your jack stands under your frame rails and we lower the rear end back down, you have enough droop so that your tires are off the ground. Okay, now that the truck's in the air, we got all four wheels and tires hanging. We need to locate the KDSS accumulator assembly. Go to the middle of your driver's side door, slide underneath, and it's right there. We're going to take this cover off. It'll give us access to the valves, and then we can open it up. This is the accumulator shield that we've got to remove. You're looking for these two 12mm bolts. We're going to be taking these dudes off. Ready? All right, now that you've got these bolts out and they hit you in the face, slide the bracket off and away. Ooh, billet aluminum. Fancy. So we've located the shutter valve bolts. There's one here and there's one here. They are 10 millimeters. What I like to do is mark them on the bottom side with a black pin so that we can know where the original clocking was. And the purpose is, this system, we're going to back these off. We're going to unscrew them 2 complete turns. Okay, that's one. I'm going to use a gear wrench to do this. And that is 2. That's 1. Got a mark coming around, and that is 2. Dead nuts. Now that we have the KDSS shutter valves open correctly, it's going to allow full articulation and movement of the front and rear sway bars. It'll make it a lot easier for us to get our suspension installed, and it's safe so we won't screw anything up on our GX. All right, we got to unhook our ABS bracket from the UCA. That's a 10mm bolt, and we got a 12mm bolt on the spindle to get our ABS brackets off. Get them out! By the way, take your bolt, just throw it back in, because then you won't lose it, and everybody knows how forgetful you are. All right, once you get your brake line bracket off the spindle, wiggle it out. Gee, that one's stubborn. You have to kind of move that. You've got a hard line, your hard brake line's right here, so just massage that guy out of the way. Now we need to remove the cotter pin from our castle nut on the bottom of the upper ball joint. Just use a pick. These stock ones come out easy. All right, now we need to get that castle nut off, so grab a 19mm wrench. I'm going to use another one for a little extra help. And that comes off real easy. When you're separating the ball joint from the spindle, you got this nice flat smash pad that the OEM designed for you to hit. So don't hit anything else, just hit right here. You can use a dead blow or a small sledge. Boing! Now that you got your UCA separated from your spindle, I want to show you something here. See your CV axle here? When you move your spindle back and forth, see how that pushes in and out? If you let this spindle come too far out and hang, you can actually dislocate your CV axle in here and possibly tear your boot, and it's a pain to get back in. So when you pop this apart, do not let this assembly hang too far out. That's why you want to use a strap or a bungee or something and try to secure it in place. We've got more than enough room to get this coilover out. Cool, now we can attack the top of the strut. You've got 3 strut top bolts where the top of the coilover mounts into the perch. So just start breaking these things loose. It's a 14mm wrench. If you've got a gear wrench, it makes it go a lot faster. You can also use a socket, but sometimes you have a tight clearance here, so these gear wrenches sure make it easy. And leave one of these nuts tight because it will hold the strut in place. You can loosen it, just leave a few threads on there. That way when we pull our bottom shock bolt out and drop our control arm down, the whole thing doesn't just come blowing out. All right, now we got to get this bottom shock bolt out. It's a 19mm nut and a 19mm bolt. Get that shock bolt out. Now that we've got the bottom shock bolt removed, come back up to the top of your strut, grab from underneath, push up, and you can spin off this strut top nut. And now we're ready to pull the whole thing out. All right, when you're pulling your coilover out, pull up and then drop the bottom down kind of in front of your sway bar, and then push up on your upper control arm. It's going to take a little bit of working around, but you should have enough clearance to get it out. Pops right out. Stock coilover's out. Time to get the Foam Cell Pro pre-built coilover back in. Put it in the same way you got the old one out. Drop it in and down, kind of behind the sway bar. It goes slow so I don't scratch the coils. Keep these things looking nice. All right, once you get them up in there, grab one of your upper strut top nuts. You can just spin it on finger tight. So get that hanging in place, and now we can attack the bottom. Once you get your coilover in, you may have to push down on your lower control arm, but it should slide in just about perfect. Yep, and it did. Now we just got to get that lower shock bolt put in. Grab your lower shock bolt, try to get it lined up. Take a little bit of massaging to get started. That's actually went in really nice. Look at that. Sweet. Throw your washer on and your nut. You can throw anti-seize on here if you want to. Leave this bottom shock bolt and nut just finger tight. Once the truck's on the ground, we'll torque everything so we don't twist our bushings. Hop back up to the top and we'll put our strut top bolts back on. Grab a 14mm wrench. I always tighten the back one first because it's the hardest one to get to. You don't have very much throw on your wrench when you pull, so start there. All right, when you're tightening these things down, I think the torque spec calls for G&T, good and tight. Want to know how to install the Ironman 4x4 Pro Forged upper control arms on your GX? I'm going to show you how. Let's do it. So to get your UCAs installed on your driver's side, unfortunately, you got to take the battery out. So let's start there. 10mm nut. Loosen it back. Your terminal will slide off. And grab a deep dish 10mm socket. We can take our battery strap off. Once you get the nut loosened, loosen it up to the top of the threads, and it should give you enough clearance because it's just a J hook at the bottom. Cool. See? Told you. All right, now it's all unhooked. Battery comes up and out. All right, so this is our problem, the battery tray. It's in the way of this bolt back here. So pull your plastic battery tray out, set it aside. This is a 10 mil bolt. We'll remove it. Then we can move our main wiring harness out of the way and get that big upper control arm through bolt out the front. That loosened up easy. We're going to loosen up the front through bolt. It's a 19 millimeter wrench. Hook up one wrench on the front and get another one on the back and break them loose. As you're loosening this through bolt nut, I take my left thumb and stick it underneath the UCA, because as you loosen it, your UCA is going to fall. See? And I don't want it dropping in to my coil and dinging up the powder coat. I just got the nut and the washer off. I like to set those aside. The one thing you'll notice, if you try to push this bolt through, it's going to hit against this wire harness. So before we get to that step, right here, grab a pair of needle nose, clamp down, and push it through the firewall. And that way, we can remove this obstruction to get the bolt through. We can just pull that bolt right through. Come on. Yes. Yes. Haha. Sweet. Now that I've got the through bolt partially out up here, I'm going to go back underneath and guide it through. Haha, got it out. Now you don't have to pull this through bolt out. If you can just lay it down in there and rest it, it's fine to stay in there. Because what we're going to do is grab our new Ironman Pro Forge UCA, and it's going right back in. Just make sure when you put it back in that you go underneath the ABS lines so that it'll rest properly. These things fit snug, so it can take a little bit of time, but eventually if you just kind of work it back and forth, you'll get them in there and set. So now that they're set, let's just grab our through bolt. We'll go up top and feed it through. It's always easier doing it when you've got help, but if you're doing it by yourself, it's not impossible. Just get the bolt sitting in it from the top, then you can go underneath. Grab your front washer. Now you can get a hand on the bolt from underneath. Back it out. Get that washer on. Get in there. There you go. Now grab your washer and nut for the rear. And get her started. There we go. Cool. And again, you want to set this finger tight because we're going to get the truck on the ground where it's setting. Then we'll torque everything down. So Ironman 4x4 includes a hardware pack with your UCAs. Comes with a couple of these Allen set screws and a couple of thick washers. You might be wondering what these thick washers are for. Grab your washer and your castle nut. Washer first, then the castle nut. The washer is here so that your castle nut will line up with the through hole on the ball joint shaft. 19 millimeter wrench. You want to get it tight but not over tighten. What holds a castle nut in place isn't the torque you put on it. I guess it sort of does, but you want to line it up with your through holes. It's the cotter pin that keeps the castle nut from walking. Once you've got the castellation slot lined up correctly, run your cotter pin through, grab your needle nose, and bend your tabs back. Done. One thing you might have to do on your ABS bracket that bolts onto the UCA is on the GX460, it's a little too narrow, so we're going to have to bend this outer flange up so that it'll fit. Because the UCA is a multi-vehicle application, sometimes this fits right on just fine, sometimes you need to do a little bit of adjustment. Last modification to your ABS bracket you need to make is we need to drill out that hole for the set screw. It's a little bit big. So be careful. Obviously we don't want to drill through our ABS line, but I think if we hold it like that, let's see, I think we'll clear. I use a step bit. We'll just waller her out just a little bit. Perfect. So grab that black set screw that came in the hardware bag and a 5mm Allen wrench, and we'll get it started in there. Sweetness. And that just goes right on in. Now that we got our driver's side UCA all back in, we just got to button up the battery box. So make sure you put your wiring harness back in, battery tray on top of that, drop your battery in, hook everything up, just put it back in the way you took it out. Front of the truck's done. Now we can move to the back and get those coils and shock swapped out. All right, now it's time to get the rear shocks pulled out. 17mm socket. Too easy. So now just knock the bottom of the shock off. When it comes to removing your rear shocks, if you look at the top here, you don't have a whole lot of clearance. At the very top of the shock stem, you'll see a couple of small flats. Those are so you can get a wrench on there and loosen this nut. But one way to cheat it, if you've got a gear wrench, flip that up on top. It's a 17, and then take yourself a pair of channel locks, or even a pipe wrench, because these stock shock bodies are all one piece. So you can grab the outer shock body here, and then you can break it loose. And that is a heck of a lot easier than trying to grab those little flats at the top of the shock. Now that we've got the rear driver's side shock ripped out, we're going to go to the rear passenger side and get that one out too. We need to remove the sway bar from the rear end so that we can get the rear end to articulate down, and then we can pop our coils out. This is a 19mm bolt. You can only get it from the inside because there's no clearance on the outside of it. You might need a breaker bar. That actually came out pretty good. Same thing on the passenger side. Man, these sway bar bracket bolts were a bear to get out, but you can see how they had anti-seize in there, so we'll make sure and hit these with anti-seize when we reinstall them. But now that we've got them out, you should be able to pry or just get this sway bar pulled out of the way and swing it back. That'll help us drop our rear end down so we can pull the coils out. Let's grab your floor jack and we'll put it underneath the mount here, and we'll lift up the passenger side. And as we lift the passenger side of the rear end, the driver's side will actually articulate down and away so we can get that coil out easier. And that works awesome. It's so much easier than bouncing on top of your rear disc brake to try to get the rear end to drop down. And we didn't even have to unhook the panhard bar, so nice. I'll take these small gains where we can get it. Now all you gotta do is literally just slide that coil right out. All right, now that we've got the coil out, we've got our Ironman Toyo 56B coils that are gonna go back in. And I want to show you one thing real quick. So we're just gonna use our stock isolator cone, and that fits in right here like that, because for the recommended 2-inch lift that we're putting back in, that's all you need. Now, if you wanna trim left to right, because you might have some lean, or if you wanna do a lift in the rear, you can actually order one of our trim packers. And these things, they've got a locating flange right there, similar to like these isolator cones. They tuck right in on the top and they give you an additional lift in the rear. So it's a great option. They're polyurethane. This is part number LCPR25. And if that's what you're trying to achieve, a higher lift, this is a great way to go. Let's get this spring in. Isolator cone goes on the top. So if your truck is dirty like ours, which it will be, you're gonna have a bunch of dirt in the bottom of this trough or the bottom of your coil rests. So I try to at least wipe some of it out. That way it won't, if you get extra grit or even a small rock in there and you put your coils in, it could chip or damage the powder coat, and that just opens up an opportunity for corrosion to start. So once we've got it all wiped out, you can see where the bottom of the coil termination will fit down here. So I've got it clocked correctly, and then let me see, slide it in there, come back up, great. And make sure where your coil terminates, that's not butted up all the way against the shoulder, or it'll squeak when your rear end's articulating. So back it off about a 1/4 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. Basically, I just put my pinky in there, squished down. You just don't want it rubbing. Let's lower the jack on the other side. This end will suck back up. Now, if you've got a buddy with you, have him watch the upper coil so that it tucks into place. But if you're by yourself, just give a little pressure here. You can move it, but yep, that's seated correctly. All right, now we'll jack up our driver's side, and that'll make the passenger side drop down. We can get the coil out over there. Getting the rear KDSS sway bar is actually going in a lot easier than I thought. I just had to use a pry bar and a hammer, and yeah, got it lined up. It's got this rear bushing in it. It's almost like a Johnny joint. But throw some anti-seize on your bolt when you put it back in. You get her all locked down. Got the rear passenger done. Now I just need to get the driver's side. It's working. Where's my smasher? Dude, I can't believe that worked. So we're ready to install our rear foam cell Pro shocks in the back of the GX, but I wanted to take a quick moment to address the hardware pack that comes with the shocks, because we always get questions on this and it can be confusing. So what comes in the pack? You've got 2 bushings and 4 washers. And if you look down here, I'm going to show you the difference. You have 2 of these flat washers that are almost the same size. One has a larger hole and one has a smaller hole. Then you have 2 of these washers that are flanged. See, they have that flanged shoulder on them. You have one that has a short height and one that has a taller height on it. And then you have the nylock nut that goes on top. So to get started to build this, you want to take your flat washer with the larger hole, set that on top first, cupped upward, like a bowl, like it would hold water. Then you take your rubber bushing. And if you zoom in here, you can see that that bushing has a flat side, and on this side it has a radius side. And a radius is just a fancy term I like to use to make myself sound smarter. It just means it's got a curve in it. You want to take the bushing and you want to put it flat side down. So the flat side goes against the flat washer, just like that. Then you take the flanged washer that has the short flange top, you know, it's at the short locating flange, and that goes on top just like that. That is going to install up into the perch. Once it's in the perch, you're going to take this flange washer, it's got the tall flange on it, and that is going to set down on top into your frame, and that'll lock right in place. Take your second bushing and put that radius side down, or rounded side down, flat side up. Next, take your flat washer with the smaller hole and place it on top, cupped downward. Then, last piece is your nylock nut. Finger thread that on as far as you can with your fingers, and you'll see on the top of the shaft, the threaded shaft, see how that's not perfectly round? There's flats. Those flats are so you can get a wrench on there, or even vice grips or whatever you want to use. That's how you're going to hold the stem as you lock down the nylock nut with a gear wrench. So I'm going to pull it back apart. We'll show you how to set it up. So we're going to take our top bushing stack off. Again, flat washer cupped up, bushing, flat side down, radius up, and then that other flanged washer, the short flange facing up. We'll slide over here. And that fits just like that. And then to get these in, we'll go flange washer down, and that'll lock right into the frame like that. Next, we got the rubber bushing, and you can lower the shock down because you don't have a lot of room to work. And we'll get this top washer pushed on. Takes a little bit of working it around, but key is you want to get it to locate properly. And then you got to get that nylock nut in there. And this is a trick. There you go. You get it over the top. But with your other hand, you want to be pushing up from underneath on this shock to give you as much of those threads as you can to show up. There you go. So make sure you've got that all nice and tight and that nothing's misaligned. And then we can start locking it down. Grab yourself a 19mm ratcheting wrench, slip that over the top. There you go. Once you've got that on there, take yourself a pair of needle nose vice grips. This part's tricky, but you're gonna have to feed it in and try to grab those tabs on the top. So we got the top side of the shock all locked down. On this top nylock nut, it's important that you tighten this thing down almost about as hard as you can get it, because when this nylock nut, as you tighten it down, that's what's drawing this bottom washer and locking the bushing underneath in place. That way, you know, those locating flange washers that we had, we don't want those to skip out and rock around the frame. So make sure those are locked down good and tight. And you can see visually here how our bushings are starting to squish. That's what you're looking for. Another good move is to throw a little anti-seize on this lower shock mount here. That way the bushing doesn't rust to your truck. You will thank yourself later. You can see that the Foam Cell Pros are so big and beefy that we have to offset the mount here, because if you try to put it on this way, it won't clear. So make sure that you orient it correctly so that you have the right clearances. Also, slide your floor jack under your truck and lift up the rear end. That way, your shocks will reach. Go ahead and just tighten your lower shock bolts finger tight. We'll torque it when we get it on the ground again. We don't want to tighten it up in the air because it'll twist the bushings. Suspension's done, time to get our wheels and tires back on. Hey, just another reminder, don't mess with your truck. We still need to get it on the ground. We'll get all the suspension torqued to spec, then we can close those shutter valves on the KDSS. Just want to make sure that we don't screw that KDSS system up. Coming down. Right, now that the truck's on the ground, we just need to go back through and get all of our suspension components tightened back up. So on your upper UCA through bolt, it's almost impossible to get a torque wrench in here, so the spec calls for, once again, G&T, good and tight. Let's get our front lower shock bolt tightened down. Grab a 19mm socket and an extension, and we're going to lock this baby down to 135 foot-pounds. Now we just got to get the lower shock bolt on our rear done. 17mm socket, and you want to tighten this thing down to 96 foot-pounds. Also make sure and get your rear sway bar bolts locked back down. Should be 45 foot-pounds on these. So now that the truck's back on the ground and had time to settle, we can close up our KDSS system. We're going to turn those shutter valves back 2 full rotations, the same amount that we backed them out. And we've got some marks on these bolts so we know exactly where to clock them. It's a 10mm head on each side. So that's 1, 2, that's perfect. You see that mark come around. 2, cool. All right, and then just get the guard back in place. It slides up in there like that. Grab your 2 12mm bolts. There we go, nice and snug. Don't over tighten these because you're going into aluminum. All right guys, that does it for the GX460 build. We've got our Foam Cell Pro suspension all in and buttoned up. Hopefully you enjoyed having a step-by-step set of instructions to help you with your build. If you like the video, make sure to hit like and subscribe. Punch the bell so you'll get notified when we drop new content, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And obviously if you need more info or instructions on any of this great gear, you can check it out at Ironman 4x4America.com. See ya.